needed to conquer the country, and in the mostly American traders who introduced the chiefs to luxury consumer goods and how to go into debt to acquire them. Annexation, then, can only be understood in this broader context of the Americanization of Hawaii. Oddly, there has never been a narrative history of Hawaii. There was a great deal of academic appraisal of the subject in the decades leading up to statehood in 1959, much of which has been reprinted for current reading, and James Michener's famous novel, Hawaii, which rocketed him to literary stardom, came out in the very year of statehood. Modern academic studies have been rooted in the reigning politically correct paradigm of race, gender, and exploitation, which, as it turns out, are highly appropriate lenses through which to view the island's history. But the Hawaii I found is far more complex. Early in the process, I had coffee with a distinguished history professor friend of mine to discuss my possible return to graduate study, looking toward completing a long-abandoned PhD. He asked how my Hawaii work was coming, and I said that while I was finding little to change my opinion that the 1893 overthrow was indefensible, I was also increasingly surprised and troubled by the pervasive oppression of the common people by their own chiefs and kings before Americans ever showed up. I cited several examples. The professor nodded and allowed that this was indeed the case, but he warned me that if I wrote the book that way and did not position the Hawaiians as victims of American racism and exploitation, as he said, it won't help you get accepted back into grad school. I marinated in this irony for a few moments and said, "This must be what they mean by academic freedom." Noting my shock, the professor went on to say that race, gender, and exploitation have ruled the scholarly paradigm for 30 years and are entrenched for probably 30 more. He has made his peace with it, and he has disciplined himself to teach and write in that vocabulary. But it also seemed clear that when the actual facts of the history conflict with the reigning theoretical model, it may fall to non-academic writers to disseminate a more nuanced narrative. The danger with this, of course, is that many trade writers who frolic in the vineyard of history are not trained historians and are liable to seize upon the ill-conceived or the sensational, a trap that has admittedly also snared a history professor or two. All this is meant only to express my sense of responsibility in handling a subject as multifaceted as Hawaii. I knew going in that discussion and re-examination of how to interpret the island's history is in active ferment, but what I found was an intellectual community in near riot over control of the narrative. Revisionism, very often appropriate but sometimes excessive, provocative, and overreaching, is a given feature now of American history as presented in the Academy. Hawaii, however, has placed the phenomenon in a pressure cooker, by its isolation from other fields of history, by the long suppression of the native culture, and the suddenness of a rich profusion of studies that incorporate it. Consequently, it is not unusual to find summaries of the American missionaries in Hawaii that treat their presence as a foreign invasion, but it is incomplete and misleading to exclude mention of Opukahai'a, or Hopu, or other refugees from the Kamehameha conquest, with their insistent challenges to the American Christian community to evangelize the islands and end the horrors of endless warfare and kapu, the ancient regimen of taboos. One history of the Chief's Children's School, apart from acknowledging that the enterprise was undertaken at the request of the ali'i, the noble class, treats it as a purely American, ethnocentric gutting of the native culture, and omits any mention of the scholarly John Papa'i'i, kahu of the king's niece and nephews, who functioned as a vice principal of the school, who appreciated the good that both cultures had to offer and who was an important bridge from the old culture to the modern world. This debate over historical candor is hardly new. No sooner had Hawaii's first printed chronicler, Samuel Liliuokalani Kamako, begun relating Ka Mo'olelo Hawaii, the history of Hawaii, in the Hawaiian language journal Ka Nupepa Kuokoa in June 1865, then he suffered robust criticism from readers who were offended that the knowledge was being imparted to those who had no permission to hear it. This subject is not acquired by the common people, huffed Una in an opinion editorial, nor by the country people. Only through the chiefs was it gained. In ancient times, this was a very sacred subject, never to be given to another. 3 years of research